Good morning from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It is 10:59 a.m. on Anzac Day, the 25th of April 2025. I don't aggrandise war, coming from family on both sides of that war and the abject horrors that were afflicted and inflicted upon the people of that time, and the intergenerational trauma that I personally received from those entities that survived that war. There's a lot I've had to say about that, and it's in my writings and probably in public posts. You can probably find it on Facebook. I don't know how much of it you can find, but I've written at length about that, so I don't really want to talk about it anymore. Apart from saying all wars are hell, and until we stop fomenting and creating war against other human beings, our own species, and the current genocide, the bioengineered genocides, unless we stop all that evil shit, we will never have our beautiful lives that I keep dreaming of, or peace, or any real joy. Everything has to be artificially manufactured and given to us like tubes in a matrix. Real joy, hard won, and freedom is a rarity. I have experienced it from time to time because I've danced it and I've written it and I've observed it and experienced it in the joys and beauty of nature. I've even on rare occasions experienced joy with a human lover, but not often, you understand. Because of my history of trauma, I attracted too many monsters. But those rare, beautiful glimpses of what is possible and what could have been enough to sustain me through this very, very difficult, very fraught, very painful existence. And here's to more joy being co-created potentially with someone wonderful one day. So we continue reading Ghost Stations 2 by Bruce Barrymore Halfpenny, and I'm looking out on still a rather bleak rainy day, but the rain ceased and the sun's fighting its way through like the beautiful life we're all fighting for in one form or another. Those of us who have not yet attained that, of course. Some of you are already living your beautiful lives. How wonderful and blessed are you? And I say that without any jealousy because, like I said, I've had rare glimpses and beautiful rare moments when there was kindness in this world, and that's why I'm still here, hanging rather tenuously by a thread for my orchestral, orgasmic, angelic, inspired and protected and blessed beautiful life. My nose is a bit congested. It's a side effect of the off-brand Viagra I've had to be put on for my bladder, so bear with me, and I may get quite dizzy and lightheaded, which is another side effect. And it's only day 2, it's only my second tablet, but already the nose has started. I was hoping that I wasn't going to get any side effects, but it is what it is. People are there. It's all very frustrating, holding on to this physical form that is has been broken and rebuilt too many times, so I struggle at times. And but like anyone at my age, we all have health issues of one kind or another. Some of you are only experiencing them for the first time, and others like me who've had rather poor health since early childhood. So It gets a bit grinding on the gears after a while. But anyway, we live our best lives the best way we can, with hope for the future and love in our hearts, and, as I say, take joy and delight and comfort where we find it, hopefully from good, kind, honouring people who see us and hear us and cherish us. There's been enough ugliness, and the Mama T does not want to live in that consciousness ever, ever again, and certainly not anymore. So we're shucking off all that does not serve us and living free, which is the only way of life worth living. In freedom. Many, many people died in World War I and World War II. For that freedom, we so quickly seceded to the monstrosities of our age, our global governments. So I want to remind you, never ever forget our history. Yesterday was also Holocaust Remembrance Day. Never forget our history, what was sacrificed in actual blood and bone and tears and sinew and spirit, so we can live free. Never cede, never quit, never yield to our enemies. And you all know, YouTube world, who those enemies are, those that interfered with the very fabric of our very existence, our DNA. So we continue on this dark and morose day, holding on to shreds of our humanity and hope and happiness, telling ghost stories which are equally dark and morose. Ghost stories direct from World War II as well, so it's interesting timing that I chose to start this book a few days ago, and it's converged with Anzac Day. It's kind of appropriate. It's the souls reminding us, don't forget about us, what we lost, our futures, our wives and sweethearts and girlfriends and children and progeny, what was taken from us by old men's greed and corruption in boardrooms, smoking cigars, wanting to take over entire nations. Chapter 12. Is it Lindholm Willie? Question mark. I have no idea who Lindholm Willie is, but I guess we're about to find out, people of Earth, together on this journey through time and space, through heart and mind, body, sinew, spirit, soul. Those of us who've not seeded our souls. If you're on this channel, you've still got soul because you listen to my mad ramblings, which are not quite so mad, but factual and truthful and experiential. So it takes a stern bit of stuff to tolerate the Tanya. It's why I don't have lovers. They just want froth and bubble and good times and a quick in and out and move on to the next victim, and I'm not that kind of a woman. Certainly my muse Bodicea would never allow me to cede, quit or yield to a man that wants to debase me, ever, ever again. There was far too much debasement, even in recent times. Just saying. But anyway, that's on them, isn't it, darlings? Another story to catch the public interest and bring in more information was the story about Billy Lindholm and the Jigsaw Ghost. At the end of July 1987, many newspapers carried the story about the uniformed body of a Polish airman that was found, perfectly preserved, in a peat bog on Hatfield Moor. Body riddle, ran one heading. Fighter pilot's body found, ran another news heading. Now people were asking the question, could this body be that of Billy Lindholm, or Lindholm Willie, as he was also known? The body was a mystery. But first, let me go back in order to try and solve the mystery. The station officially opened under the name of Royal Air Force Hatfield Woodhouse as an operational airfield in No. 5 Group Bomber Command. For some unknown reason, construction work had been very slow. Work had started as far back as May 1938 on an area known as Hatfield Moors. Even then, workmen had complained of a cold, eerie feeling. One man refused to work on the site after complaining of an uneasy feeling every time he started work around the hangar section. Excuse me, tea's sprouting everywhere. Right. I'll turn into a camellia bush one day. I'll be at this channel and I'll just manifest as a camellia bush. In full bloom, babies, because if you're going to manifest, do it right. Am I right? Shut up, Davidson. No, I'm joking about that. He's not here at the moment. Thank the goddess. Pain in my ass. Anyway, now I've said his name, he'll probably turn up, but just shuck that off, like I shuck off all my former lovers who turn rancid. Not worth keeping, are they? No. Anyway, you have to laugh. Even then, workmen had complained of a cold, eerie feeling. One man refused to work on the site after complaining of an uneasy feeling every time he started work around the hangar section. It's really hot. Really, really hot. The first squadron to arrive at the new airfield was number 50, and they were equipped with 13 twin-engined Hampton bombers. The first operation was on the night of 13th-14th of July 1940. 11 aircraft were dispatched to attack an oil refinery near Hamburg, but because of bad weather, only one aircraft reached the primary target area. Just a little side note there. My mother, who, as you know, if you know me or you watch this channel, was German, came from Hamburg. And Hamburg was saturation bombed by the Allies, by the English, the British and the American forces, and the Russians, I suppose, as well. I think, it would have been Russian bombers as well. Anyway, I think. But anyway, I know for a fact the British and the Americans specifically targeted Hamburg because it had a lot of industrial ammunitions factories, and here they mention an oil refinery and an entire neighbourhood where my mother had actually resided at that time. She was safely billeted down in South Germany, was bombed with a phosphor bomb, which was an actual war crime to use that against civilians. But anyway, horrific it was. But anyway, absolutely horrific. The bodies shrank. to the size of dolls, 2 feet long, charcoal little dolls. That's how fucking horrific it was. And anyway, my mother wasn't there because she was billeted down in the south, but she had a dream of that event and saw the bodies shrinking, the shrunken bodies. So she phoned her mother, my grandmother Eva Meyer, and begged her. She said, get out of the neighbourhood, they're going to bomb, and I don't know what it is, but it's a bright flashing light and bodies are going to shrink. My grandmother, who had her own psychic abilities but for some reason didn't believe my mother, kept arguing with her, don't be stupid. Nothing like that could possibly happen. You can't wrap your mind around the level of evil of other people's humanity. And anyway, so my mother called back on a couple of occasions, she said, over a couple of days, about a week prior, and said, get out now or you will die. So fortunately, my grandmother eventually listened to her, and she and my grandfather went to the outskirts of Hamburg, out in the country area, and slept on the ground for 2 nights. And indeed, that neighbourhood was bombed with phosphor bombs, and exactly as my mother dreamed came true. It was utterly, utterly horrific. But anyway, as if it was nothing. I don't mean it to sound like that way. I'm just moving forward in my train of thought. So many years later, my mother, I was about 17. It was before I met Michael Aarons, actually. So I must have been about 16, or in the early months of 17, because I met my husband when I was 17 and a half, 17 and a quarter, something like that. Who cares anyway? Fuck's sake. What a fucking waste of a life that was. But anyway, we won't go into that. But anyway, so my mother had made an acquaintance of an elderly Jewish man, Oliver Goldsmith, which is also a name of a famous philosopher, I think, in Britain. Anyway, his name was Oliver Goldsmith. And he was actually also an Englishman, like the other Oliver Goldsmith. And quite comical, synchronicity of events. And he was a jewellery wholesaler. That's how Mum had come to know him, because she was buying bits and bobs to sell at the markets. And but he sold mainly precious jewellery. But I'm trying to figure out, because she only sold costume jewellery. So what was she doing? How did she befriend him? Anyway, I think possibly because I was working for my boss, Susie van der Crost, at the time, in the very famous in Wellington, New Zealand, Susie's coffee shop. She might have met him through there, because he used to frequent the coffee shop too. It's possible she met him through there. Nothing romantic was going on. Well, I don't think so. You can never tell with my mother. She was a bit of a femme fatale. But I mean, it's embarrassing, actually. But you have to laugh. So she used to complain that her daughters were nothing like her. Thank the goddess we were nothing like her. Although I've caught up a bit since then in older age. I've become a little bit of a femme fatale myself. Who knew? I wasn't trying to. It just happened organically. Whereas my mother worked at babies, worked it and had been working it since she was a young woman. So think high camp style of femininity like Jaja and Eva Gabor, or who was her other muse? Sophia Loren, that just the way to walk into a room, all tits and ass and that. That was my mother. It's embarrassing. Anyway, kind of funny now. Like, I can laugh about it now, but it wasn't cool growing up with her. Trust me on this. It was quite embarrassing. So anyway, So she takes me to visit Oliver Goldsmith at his business premises. And he was a delightful elderly gentleman. He really was. He was Orthodox Jew and still practicing Orthodox Jew. And he motioned to me. He said, you're wanting to convert to Judaism, which at that age I was indeed beginning the process. I said, yes, indeed I am. And he said, Orthodox or Reform? I said, well, I've been knocked back by the Orthodox rabbi. He said, just keep going, they've got to knock you back 3 times. I went, yeah, I know, but I'm not sure if I want to be, live such a strictly religious life at that time. Wasn't sure. And I didn't like the way that Orthodox rabbi had treated me in Wellington. He didn't just refuse my conversion, but he was particularly nasty. Like, he was really foul fucking creature. Anyway, of course I didn't tell Oliver Goldsmith this, but he was a bastard, that particular rabbi. It was actually a shock to me, an ontological shock to my young mind, because I thought rabbis were men of couth and dignity and honour and respect and grace and, men of God and kind. Then I met that bastard. So it was actually my first experience, of finding out that just because you're a religious person doesn't mean you're a good person. One of the first great shocks of my life, actually, to be honest, at 17. I don't know why. I've met many monsters growing up, but I guess they hadn't pretended to be men of God and, men of faith. And anyway, so we're sitting in Oliver's office, and he says to me, I'm a very religious man. I said, oh, are you? How delightful. He said, yes. He said, I pray 3 times a day according to tradition. I said, oh, that's very good. That's very good. He said, yes, I keep my prayer shawl with me at all times. He said, it's under my chair. Let me just show you. Mine's behind the couch as usual. Right behind the couch. So he pulls out his tullet bag. This is a tullet bag which I hand embroidered back in 1992. I think I was still finishing it off when I was in that terrible tornado that hit Harvey Bay when we were on holiday in Harvey Bay. Anyway, he pulls out his tullet and he says, I keep it almost as a good luck symbol. And I looked at him a bit oddly because, dear God, it's not meant to be a good luck symbol, but I guess kind of a protective object. Is mine. I bought when I converted as a very young girl, and pure wool with the tzitzits, which are probably the holiest part of the whole garment. And only Reformed Jewish women wear a tullet. Orthodox women are not permitted to. They're not deemed to be equals in Orthodox Judaism. So you can see why, even as a young woman, being a bit of a feminist, I was drawn to the more progressive branch of Judaism because I prefer to be treated as an equal to a man, even though I used to sport a uterus and I have a vagina. I refuse to be treated as less than. a man. I don't care what culture, religion, walk you have. To me, it's kind of an ignominy to treat any human being as less than, and certainly because of their gender. It's outrageous. So anyway, so Oliver shows me his talent with great pride and delight. And I think it was almost like he was testing my knowledge or testing my connectivity to Judaism. It was a bit of a strange thing to pull out and show me, a young teenage girl with her German mother. Mum and him seemed to be quite well acquainted. They were joking around with each other and talking quite amicably. And looking back, hindsight 2020, I think he was thinking about offering me an apprenticeship, but he didn't come out with it, and I had no idea what was going on. So I just, as I do, obliviously went with the flow and just, was courteous. He asked me what I wanted to do with my life, and I said at that time I was studying law, failing it, but studying it. And I have to laugh now, but it wasn't funny at the time. I was deeply aggrieved that I was failing it, actually. But anyway, there was a lot of sabotage that went on at my university, so that was part of it too. Won't go into details with that, but I've written at length about the ugliness that went on when I was at university. So he asked me, what do you want to do with your life? Well, I'm hoping to be a lawyer, have some kind of career and be successful, whatever that means. And then he sort of looked a bit disappointed because I think he was thinking quite seriously about offering me an apprenticeship. But I didn't ask because I had no real interest in working in jewellery at that age. Because my mother had made me work at it since the age of 6. I was heartily sick of it by the time I was 17, trust me on that. And I never thought in a million years that I would end up learning silversmithing starting 4 years ago in 2021. If you'd said that to me when I was 17, I would have been like, nah, that'll never happen. That'd be ridiculous. So it's funny how life takes you in these little swallow murmurations full circle to your becoming and your destiny or whatever it is you're meant to be working at for however long I work at it, since I'm also failing with that cuff I'm working on at the moment. Makes me want to give up, but never cede, never quit, never yield. But because I never got an apprenticeship, I'm self-teaching and it's very, very difficult, people of Earth. Anyway, back to Oliver Goldsmith. So invariably, as happens with survivors of wars, the subject of war came up. Again, I don't know if it was some kind of psychological test to see what I would say about it, but I just sat very quietly, observing and listening in. So Oliver turns to my mother. They both had typical survivor's sense of humour, which is very, very schwarz, black, dark, gravel-rashed, gallows, hangman's humour. You see it especially a lot in the Jewish community amongst Holocaust survivors and people who've survived wars and people like me who've survived child sexual abuse. We can be very, very dark, and we're not bad people per se, but we see the duality in life, and it's part of who we are. So this is turning to be a very long segue, but anyway. So Oliver turns to my mother and he said, where were you actually born in Germany, Gisela? And I think he called her Mitzi. Most people called her Mitzi for short, just easier to remember. So he said, where were you born in Germany, Mitzi? My mother replies, Hamburg. He said, I was with the RAF and we bombed your city many, many times. He said, I was I was in the bomb turret dropping bombs on you, Mitzi, and my mother nodded without any sense of acrimony and went, "Ah, yes, that would be the case," and made some sort of kind of glib little joke about it, like, "But you didn't get me." And he looked at her, turned his head, he said, "Why didn't I get you, Mitzi?" She says, "I was down the south, billeted out, looking after orphan civilian children." "Were you?" he said. She said, "Yeah, that's how I survived the bombings in Hamburg." She said, "I physically wasn't there." And he just looked at her, and then he kind of said to her, "I'm sorry what we did to you, but, being a Jew and an Englishman and a gentleman and a scholar," he said, "I'm very proud of my activities bombing Hamburg." And then she looked at him and said, "Of course you are, darling. You know, you were fulfilling your service." And she said, "It's just a pity you didn't bomb Berlin and bomb Hitler, wouldn't it? And then we could have saved maybe many people during the Holocaust." And then he looked at her and he went, "Yes, why didn't we bomb Hitler?" She said, "Yes, why indeed?" And then he said to her, because he said the British considered Hamburg to be, the industrial sites with all the factories, so that was the main target. I mean, Berlin did get bombed to smithereens too, pretty much, but it's amazing how that fucking Hitler escaped everything, isn't it? See? Evil finds a way. Always does. Always does. But anyway, I was sitting in this office listening to this interchange of these two one-time enemies. Like during wartime, they would have been enemies. And my mother, boobs out, shimmering, shaking. Oliver, he was married. Oliver kind of flirting with my mother a bit, and I'm sitting there, the Jewish convert candidate, looking at these two old folks thinking, what the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? It was a very weird and surreal experience. Anyway, we came out of there and she said, "What do you think of that man?" I said, "He likes me." She said, "Yes, of course he likes you. I have big plans for you," or something, which of course my mother and any of her plans had to be immediately kiboshed by me because she was toxic as fuck and controlling and destructive. I said, "Oh yeah, what kind of plans?" "Oh, he's very, very rich and he has a son," looking at me meaningfully. I said, "Yes, and he also happened to mention that his son is engaged to be married, so you dipped out there, Mum." "Oh, doch, Mitch," she says, "we can make arrangements about that." I'm like, "No, I'm not going to be pimped out like some whore just to any man just because you have fantasies about getting cheaper jewellery through Mr. Goldsmith." She looked at me and she said, "You know me too well." I could never tell if she was joking in that instance, to be honest. She was that kind of a person. Very ruthless. Anyway, I went to visit Mr. Goldsmith with my mother on a few other occasions. And he was a happy old soul. He really was. He really liked my mother, though. I'd look at him and think, "Don't do it, guy friend." The wife came in one time, and she was a sour, dour-looking woman. And my mother, when we left, my mother being the bitch that she was, "Oh, look at that horrible woman who's married." I said, "Well, they've been married for like however long. Like, Mum, some things are actually kind of sacred. Like, have a bit of bloody respect." And she says, "Oh, darling, you know how it is." But anyway, I don't think they did anything. I think it was just a bit of joking around and flirting and being silly, Sometimes, just for a bit of fun, just to feel alive, you understand. That's where it begins. That's where it ends. But anyway, what made me think of Oliver Goldsmith? Oh, right, yes, the bombings in Hamburg. So wherever you are, Oliver, I've still got my tallet by my side too, but I haven't prayed in it for quite some years. Without a congregation because of too much toxicity and viciousness and spite, and didn't observe Passover at all. You'll be disappointed to hear. So yeah, I'm kind of wondering if I should make a return. But where do you return to in Brisbane, Australia, when the whole community is toxic and rancid, and only a few good kind souls, exist in there? One came up in my memory. The Chabad rabbi here has always been kind to me when I turned up to services or to Yom HaShoah Day, which was yesterday, and I kind of missed it. He's been kind, and of course my own Reform rabbi, Rabbi Uri Tamal, was very supportive and kind to me too, and Rabbi Cohen was also very kind. So those three gentlemen more than made up for that initial bastard I had my first interview with in Wellington, New Zealand, back when I was 17. So what year was that? 1982. Gee, that rabbi was so awful to me. His wife offered me a lift back to university, which was where I was going back. I had lectures to attend. And she spoke to me in the car and she said, if you really want to be Jewish, Tanya, she said, don't do it through my husband. She said, he doesn't like you. Instant dislike. I said, oh, you think? And she said, go through the Reform Jewish movement and you'll be treated like an equal and it'll be better for you. That was actually the Rebbetzin suggestion. What a kind, loving woman she was. She must have known she was married to a bastard, of course. One knows these things as a woman. Anyway, she took me aside and gave me, the suggestion that if I wanted to pursue that, where I could go and continue with my candidacy and my studies and become a Reformed Jew. So you see, it was a great grief, actually, about 5-6 years ago when I actually left all that behind. It was that important to me to identify and worship as a Jew. But when things get toxic and vicious and nasty, and had been going on for about 30 years here in Brisbane, the only way to survive and maintain your spiritual integrity is to walk away and move forwards. And when I move forwards, finally cut ties to communities or tribes or individuals, I very rarely go back. Because going back is usually a retrograde step involving more suffering and more trauma and more abuse, as I found with my own mother when I went back to support her. And she declined into Alzheimer's, only to have that vicious will come out when she died, of viciousness beyond belief. So never go back, only ever go forwards, people of Earth. Find your path, find your tribe, find your vibe, find good, kind people who receive you and welcome you and include you, as I got very excited about 20 months ago because I thought that's what was happening actually. Well, anyway, I might go back eventually to that group of people because, they were kind to me for a very long time. Till I got shucked off like a husk because some new flame came along. Fuck that shit. So no, I won't go back. Don't deserve to be treated like that. Anyway, where was I? Yes, Hamburg, otherwise known in German as Hamburg. So I'll just read that last line again. 11 aircraft were dispatched to attack an oil refinery near Hamburg, but because of bad weather, only one aircraft reached the primary target area. On 18th of August 1940, the airfield was changed to RAF Lindholm in order to avoid confusion with Hatfield in Hertfordshire. Hatfield in Hertfordshire hardly ever happens, so I couldn't resist. Where the Mosquito aircraft was then being built. You see, I'm a complex creature because I'm half German and quarter Polish, but on my father's side I'm English, Scottish and Irish. So I wake up every morning and I want to kill myself. It's a joke from I married an ex-murderer, you understand. Sometimes it's true though. Sometimes I do wake up and think, fuck this shit. But on we go and on we go because I'm a survivor. In July 1941, 2 Polish bomber squadrons arrived at Lindholm. The Poles flew their first operational mission from RAF Lindholm on 23rd of July 1941. Their missions followed the pattern of their predecessors in No. 50 Squadron. Successes and failures are recorded impartially in the station diary. Perhaps a typical extract for 16th of December 1941 will make the pattern clear. 6 aircraft from No. 304 Squadron and 6 from No. 305 Squadron were detailed to attack Ostend. 9 of these aircraft successfully completed their task. 1 crashed on its return in the vicinity of Thorn. 1 did not return to base, and no more has since been heard of the crew, captained by squadron leader Blazejewski. This officer had completed 26 trips, and the news that he had been awarded the DFC came through the following morning. What good is an award when you're dead? This is the insanity of war to my mind, but anyway, posthumous award I guess was in order. As the 2 Lindholm, I want my awards to come to me while I'm very much alive and can at least enjoy the kudos, by the way. What awards? My breath and my heart, my corazon and my determination to thrive and my little trinkets I make for myself. Oh, I thought that man loved me when he said, I want you to be able to forge your little fripperies, Tanya. I thought he genuinely cared about me. Ah, more fool me. Anyway, that was then, this is now. Moving on. As the 2 Lindholm squadrons formed a considerable part of the Polish contribution to the war, it was natural that important Polish leaders should visit the station. The most famous of these visitors was, undoubtedly, the Prime Minister and Commander-in-Chief of the Polish forces, General Sikorski. Shortly after this visit, which took place in April 1942, No. 304 Squadron was posted to RAF Tiree in the Hebrides. The Hebrides, I believe, is in Scotland, to become a part of Coastal Command. Is it in Scotland? I must check because I don't want to give misinformation, you understand. Grinds my gears when I'm led on wild goose chases too. I'm always the one, darling. Just saying. I'll let it go when I'm ready. When I'm ready, babies. Yes, Google is our friend, although it makes me do robot things all the time, which I don't know why. Right, here we go. I didn't this time. How nice. Where is Hebrides? I'm pretty sure it's in Scotland. Aha, right. The Hebrides are a group of islands located off the west coast of Scotland. Mama T was right. They are divided into two main groups, the Inner Hebrides closer to the mainland and the Outer Hebrides further out to sea. Oh, there we go. I feel better now. I'm not totally stupid. It's never totally stupid, but sometimes you get that. So I think this is meant to be a map of the Inner and Outer Hebrides. Right. I'd like to go there one day. You know, all over the place I'd like to go. I guess that will only happen when I transition this body and I become a light body. Hopefully I'll remember that I wanted to go to those places, so I could just turn up and have a good old look in a nanosecond and continue on my journey into the light or wherever the gods decide to send me by that transition period. Because we can't assume these things, can we, people of Earth? We can't assume that we're going to the light. I just hope they don't put me down into another body and make me do this shit all over again. I really do. I know that's selfish of me, a bit bloody entitled, but it's been a very, very long and unhappy life, and just don't want to do another rerun of it, just quite frankly. Anyway. The station mustered 13 aircraft for the first 1,000 bomber raid on 30th and 31st of May 1942. They took off for Cologne with the station commander, Group Captain A.H. Garland, flying as second pilot to Flight Lieutenant Jerez Bunt. After the success of the first raid, 2 further 1,000 bomber raids were launched within a month, and aircraft from Lindholm took part in both of them. Unfortunately, the Polish commanding officer, Group Captain Skazinski, lost his life in the second of the raids. His Wellington bomber had to ditch in the sea, and he was the only crew member to drown. It's awful, isn't it? Number 305 Squadron left for Hemswell in July 1942 because it had been decided to extend and to concrete station runways so that they could take 4-engined aircraft. The station then housed a heavy conversion unit equipped with Manchesters and Lancasters. The crews worked under extreme pressures, and there were many training accidents. By early 1944, the station strength had reached 2,700 and the accident rate increased. November 1944 was the worst accident month, the blackest day being the 20th, when 3 bombers crashed, the first at 20:53 hours, 5 killed and 2 injured. Then at 20:05 hours, Halifax HR 794 failed to gain height and crashed, 6 were injured. The third crash came at 2200 hours when Halifax 7876 hit a tree, killing 6 crew. RAF Lindholm remained open after the war and continued in a peacetime role with the Bomber Command Bombing School. Through a variety of courses, it began to train navigators in blind and visual bombing, and these men, when trained, formed the basis of the Bomber Command Strike Force. In 1955, the Navigation and Bombing System (NBS) course was introduced. This radar-controlled, computerized bombing system was for use in the V Bomber Force. Even in peacetime, a training role is not an uneventful one. Trainees graduate, their replacements arrive, and the cycle begins again. Yet, on the station, events occur and many of these attract interest. During this period, one of Lindholm's most famous characters, Lindholm Willie, made one of his periodic appearances, and an entry in the unit diary read, "I remember the instrument and radar mechanics were particularly hard-pressed to keep the aircraft flying on their bombing sorties. One was brought in front of me on a charge of being absent from duty one morning. He had overslept. In evidence of his own behalf, he told me that he had been working on a dispersed aircraft on the edge of the bog late the night before, when a figure clad in Irving suit and flying boots had approached him and asked the way to the mess. Later the lad became convinced that he had been visited by an apparition and could not sleep. I confess I took this to be a case of using Lindholm Willie as an excuse, but the airman swore that he had not previously heard the story of the Phantom Gunner. Lindholm Willie, also known as Billy Lindholm, made many appearances. Many people reported seeing an airman in mud-stained flying clothing. They were approached by the phantom figure, who asked the way to either the station sick quarters or to the operations room. Before they could answer, the figure disappeared. "I was at Lindholm in 1944, said Taff Holter, and we soon heard about the Wellington bomber that had gone into the bog at the end of the runway. It was not possible to get it out, and the crew was still on board. Many times as we came into land, we could see the crashed bomber sticking out of the mud, as if trying to draw attention to itself, like asking for help. It would come out of the mud and then go back in again. Quite often, the tail unit was well clear of the mud, and another time you could see quite a lot of it. I was back again at Lindholm in 1947 on Lincoln bombers, and the tail unit could still be seen sticking out of the mud. On one occasion, which was reported at the time, there was a knock on one of the billet doors and a young airman opened it to be confronted by a phantom airman, dressed in World War II flying clothes and jabbering away in a foreign language. As the young airman stood rooted to the spot, the phantom airman turned round and disappeared into the dark. The phantom airman was often seen in the H blocks, but it was not always made known for fear of being labelled a nut. Many strange things happened, but were never reported. However, some were reported, like the time the telephone rang in the guard room one night, and, at first, the duty staff thought it was a practical joker. The person on the telephone was jabbering away continuously in a foreign language that no one in the guard room could understand. With crews training for the V-bomber force, the security at the station was extra tight. The guard room police traced the call and they quickly surrounded the hangar, which was all locked up. When they got inside the hangar, there was no one there. So who was talking on the telephone in a foreign language? That mystery was never solved. From May 1967 to February 1970, Squadron Leader Payne served at RAF Lindholm, and he recalls, "On occasions when I was duty officer, I used to accompany one of the SPs and his Alsatian guard dog when they did their patrol around the hangar area. Lindholm Willie was supposed to appear in this area, and although I never met him face to face, I will admit there was something ethereal in the air. The sensation you feel when you could swear that someone was looking over your shoulder, although no one would be there. That doubt you got when something happened which you couldn't explain sensibly or logically. This Alsatian guard dog, for instance, not normally afraid of tackling anything, would never approach one hangar in particular." Got pain under my jaw again. I just had like a whole facial, what do you call it, kind of x-ray done, and it came up clear, so what the fuck. Anyway. So frustrating. It was the hangar nearest to the end of the airfield, nearest to the bog, and every time we neared it, he would stop, his hackles would go up, he'd whine and dig his paws in, refusing to go any further. Didn't matter what you did, he just wouldn't budge, and we couldn't get him in there at all. We couldn't see anything, but he could certainly sense something, so he remained where he was. We used to have a laugh about it, pardon me, but there was that element of doubt raised in your mind. Maybe Willie was around there, after all. Lindholm Willie had put the fear up almost everyone. On one occasion, the runway controller did not wait to find out who or what was rapping on the side of his caravan one night, just as night flying was finishing. He was not taking any chances on it being Lindholm Willie, deciding that discretion was better than valour in the circumstances. 2 American fighters had collided whilst flying in the local area. One crashed immediately, the pilot ejecting successfully, and the other one tried to reach Finningley. As he was passing over Lindholm, the pilot had to eject, and the aircraft crashed in open fields nearby. His bang seat landed on the roof of one hangar, causing quite a panic among the airmen who were working on the varsities in there, and the pilot landed on the edge of the bog. He ended up by getting covered in slime and peat, plus a liberal coating of mud. He could see the runway lights, and the lights coming from the runway controller's caravan, which was the nearest thing to him. Uninjured, but completely covered in the mess from the bog, he made his way towards the caravan, and on reaching there, he rapped on the side to attract the attention of the occupant. The duty controller, sitting in his glass house, looked around anxiously. The pilot rapped again, and this time the runway controller saw what he thought was the ghost of Lindholm Willie. Instantly, with alacrity born by sudden panic, he vacated his caravan and was going down the runway at a turn of speed which should have qualified him for entry in the Olympics. It was quite hilarious at the time, said Squadron Leader Payne. The American pilot was eventually picked up and brought to the control tower. But how do you explain to an outsider that the frantic dash of the runway controller was caused by the fact that he thought that he'd finally met up with the local ghost? RAF Lindholm closed in the late 1970s, and today the old wartime site has been turned into a prison. During the conversion into a prison, a large number of contractors worked at Lindholm. In 1985, one of the men told one of the farm staff that when he was working near a hangar, someone dressed in wartime flying clothes asked him where the medical centre was. He swore it was a ghost, and it frightened him so much he refused to work there anymore. The hangars are used for storing some of the farm and garden machinery. Also, one hangar is used as a vegetable preparation unit for vegetables, which are dispatched to all the prisons in England and Wales. In the early 1970s, a Wellington bomber was discovered in the marsh with the crew still on board. Their remains are buried in Lindholm churchyard, but many people said there was a crew member missing. Was it Lindholm Willie? The mystery could now be solved. On 23rd of July 1987, the well-preserved body of a Polish airman who died in the last war was recovered from a peat bog on Hatfield Moor near the former RAF Lindholm bomber base. The body was discovered by a Fisons employee, and Fisons informed Thorn Police Station. PC Greenslade was sent to investigate. The mystery World War II flyer had no dog tags, and he was not in an aircraft. He was wearing a wartime flying jacket and long johns. That was the only clothing that could be identified. It's a bit odd, isn't it? I suspect foul play. He was about 18 years old. His His height was 5'6" or 5'8". He was slight build, and he had light brown hair. He had both his legs broken and a broken pelvis. It was thought that he died after falling from a great height. But how? And where from? He was 9 feet down in the peat bog. A complete mystery. Forensic and RAF experts failed to discover how the body came to rest in the peat. And, after months of investigation by police, Royal Air Force and Defence Ministry officials, they have failed to identify the mystery flyer. An RAF spokesman said, "As far as records are concerned, he never existed. All planes and their crews flying in that area have been accounted for. He may have fallen from a plane listed as missing at sea, which, in fact, made it inland. The mystery flyer remains a mystery, and could it be more than a coincidence that the body was found on 23rd of July 1987, exactly 46 years since the Poles flew their first operational mission from RAF Lindholm. The mystery deepens. At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, Remembrance Day, the mystery flyer was buried in St Michael's Church at RAF Finningley, with full military honours, in a coffin bearing a brass plate with the words "Identity Unknown" printed on it. Squadron leader Harry Payne said, "Maybe Lindholm Willie, for I'm sure it is he, will now find rest among his fellow RAF comrades lying there." But to the end there was mystery. During the service there was a phone call from a mystery woman who sent a wreath. Will the hauntings now stop? I think not. What about the jigsaw ghost? Let's just see how long the next chapter is. Okay, it's only a very short one, as are the following chapters. So I'll continue reading chapter 13, The Edge of the Time Zone. I may only read this one extra chapter because I'm starting to feel lightheaded from the new medication and I'm a bit tired. And got to nurture myself a bit, people of Earth. Got to look after me, myself and I. The Edge of the Time Zone. In the late spring of 1952, a group of Royal Air Force staff officers visited RAF Blyton in Lincolnshire to check the old wartime airfield's suitability as a satellite runway for trainee jet pilots on Meteor jets to use for circuits and bumps from nearby RAF Finningley. It was a beautiful, warm, sunny day with birds singing and everything at peace with the world as they arrived at RAF Blyton. But that was soon to change. After a brief look around the old airfield, the officers went into the air traffic control building, their staff car being parked a short distance away, close to two Nissan huts. The driver of the officers' staff car was senior aircraft man Duncan Gray, an old hand, not wheel happy as he was in the early days, having just completed a tour of the Far East. Gray was not a believer in the supernatural, but he was well aware that many of the old airfields held some kind of presence. In 1947, Duncan Gray was stationed at Eynsham, a small bomb storage camp, using RAF Kidlington as their domestic site. They were shifting 45-gallon drums of liquid mustard gas, and, as a driver of a Dodge nicknamed D-Day Dodge, 5-tonner with an all-metal body, Gray was detailed to move the mustard gas. But after 10 days non-stop working, he received a splash on his right palm. This necessitated immediate medical decontamination of both himself and his vehicle, and then sent back to Einsen, a move Gray welcomed. I set off back after tea as I preferred night driving to any other time, said Duncan. Besides, I didn't want to wait in case they changed their minds. An hour later I was driving down a small road. It was dark and I had my headlights full on. Suddenly coming towards me were two headlights. I slowed down to just under 20 miles an hour, for I was new to the vehicle, which was left-hand drive, and the road was very narrow. The lights were moving too fast towards me for the vehicle to be parked. Seconds later, the lights came at me on my side. My vehicle had a long, large bonnet, large headlights, and a heavy metal grille, full width, just over above a heavy bumper. Excuse me. Turn it off a little bit. My lights seemed to make no difference. His lights came hard at me, along my bonnet, as if he had already hit me and was coming over to the windscreen. I must have swerved to the right, for the next thing I remember was my offside front wheel was in a shallow ditch and I had stalled the engine against a hedge. I was very shaken, but got out expecting to find a wreckage, even though I had felt nothing. I stood in the cool night air. All was silent. No sound of a vehicle going away. No lights, not a sound. I had a torch and spent the next 30 minutes looking over the hedges and around the area, but the only skid marks were mine. What had Duncan Gray witnessed? A few cigarettes later, he looked over his vehicle. Not a mark. He drove steadily back to RAF Kidlington, being too late for Einsam, Langsam, Blödsinn, Achterliebe Gott. Anyway, Einsam, maybe. EYNSHAM. All the English people have fallen off their chairs laughing at me, but, well, I'm not English. I'm born in New Zealand, partially raised in Australia, spent 4 months, 4 months in Germany because the cruise was a month either way, either side of that. I've been to England only briefly to catch a train to Southampton and board ship on the Ellenies to return to New Zealand. So I don't know how to pronounce all your names. So you can laugh and I'll laugh with you. Ha 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 ha. Take that. And reported what had happened at RAF Kidlington, not Einsam or Ancient or Achterliebe Gott. With no damage done to the Dodge lorry, no one would listen. I was told I must have been tired, said Duncan, and it was a reflection in the mist. Right, here's a photograph of the wartime control tower at Blyton that I can pronounce. An austere building with a small observation office on the top. Dare you enter? Doesn't look all that scary to me. I probably would have entered into it and scoot around. Anyway. But was it a reflection in the mist? That was the easy way out. Duncan Gray remembers that it was a warm, clear night. No mist around. Was that his first encounter? While the officers chatted in the control tower building, Gray decided to have a look around the two wartime Nissen huts. I thought I would have a scrounge around, he said. I got out and after a quick glance towards the control tower, I entered the first Nissen hut. On the wall was a blackboard containing flight numbers and names which were still just legible. It brought a feeling of sadness as I looked at the old blackboard. Through the open door, I could still see the staff car and the officers still upstairs in the control tower building, so I decided a little more looking or scrounging around was in order. It was only then I felt cold and very, very scared. All I could think of doing was getting out of that old Nissen hut as quickly as possible. Such was the feeling of fear. At that period, RAF Blyton was on a care and maintenance basis. The airfield opened at the end of 1942 as an operational bomber airfield, but after only 3 months, the role of the station changed and it became part of No. 1 Group Training Organisation. It remained a heavy bomber training station for the duration of the war. Halifaxes and Lancasters were the bombers used, and there were many crashes. After their visit to RAF Blyton, the staff officers decided the airfield would be suitable. SAC Duncan Gray, who was then stationed at RAF Finningley, did 3 detachments to RAF Blyton on crash crew duties. As he recalls, I was then stationed at RAF Finningley, which in my opinion was by far the very worst posting I was ever on in my 9 years in the Royal Air Force. So any detachment I was on, such as Blyton, was to me just the job. When I was on crash duties, the crash vehicle stood just outside that cold, eerie Nissen hut, but never once did I ever go inside. And funnily enough, I noticed neither did anyone else. One of the lads even admitted to me that he was always nervous around the area of the 2 Nissen huts and the control tower, so perhaps I wouldn't have gone in either because I'm very sensitive to energy and I would have felt equally nervous. Let's not pretend that I'm braver than I am, people of Earth. Certain things I'm brave at, like dealing with malfeasant, lying, betraying, treacherous men. But when it comes to ghosts, actual ghosts that are angry and putting out, "Don't come here, girlfriend," I hear and I obey. Anyway, you have to laugh. But that was not the only encounter at RAF Blyton for Duncan Gray. One other thing did happen there, he said. It was late one afternoon, and flying had just stopped for the day because of deteriorating weather conditions. The airfield had no runway lights, and so all flying had to stop with bad light. The staff at this time on detachment from RAF Finningley consisted of air traffic control staff, with a vehicle assigned to them, 1 fire crash tender, 1 backup fire vehicle, and an ambulance, all fully manned. The only other staff were cooks and 2 station police, who had the eerie task of manning the guard room and sleeping there. Everyone had either gone or were on their way to the domestic site, and only the staff and the air traffic control officers remained, and I remained behind with a utility pickup truck to collect them in. After a short while, the officer came out of the building and got in, and I set off. The weather by now was very bad. We had nearly got to the domestic site when suddenly the officer said, "Turn round, I forgot my paperwork." I quickly turned around and returned to the air traffic control building. I parked facing that eerie Nissan hut about 25 yards away. With the weather bad and now late, I had not given it another thought. After a few minutes, I heard someone coming towards my vehicle, so I started the engine. At the same time, I glanced at the off-side door window. The window was open. I saw his hand and part of his arm go to the handle as if to open the door and get in. So I did all the automatic things one does, like slipping into gear and holding the handbrake, ready for off. Next moment, his arm wasn't visible anymore, and he'd gone back to the air traffic control building. I assumed so, anyway. I don't remember being nervous at all at the time, just annoyed he was taking such a long time, thus making me last in the TQ. He eventually arrived and got into my vehicle. As he did so, saying, "Sorry I was so long, but my stuff was all over the place, and I had a hell of a job finding it all in the dusk." On hearing what he said, I suddenly felt cold all over, for it didn't sound like he had come down and gone back again. Also, he wore a civvy light raincoat. The arm that I had seen had been dark, like maybe a flying jacket or something. Had SAC Duncan Gray almost picked up a ghostly passenger? He was certainly not sure about it, and it could well have been a phantom crew member, but he was not able to prove it one way or the other. You can't really question an officer on a point like that, he said. One would probably end up looking like a right twit. So I never really knew. But it didn't improve my feelings about Blyton. Over the years, many people have visited the old wartime airfield at Blyton, and they all agreed the old airfield had a very sad atmosphere. Duncan Gray had felt the cold, eerie, sad atmosphere. And had he seen a phantom airman? Was the ghostly light that forced him off the road more than just a reflection in the mist? Had he been on the edge of the time zone? And thus concludes today's reading. I'll continue potentially later on this evening or tomorrow, see how I feel. I need a break and a bit of a rest. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I, including my little segue about my mother and our jeweller friend, Oliver Goldsmith. Funny times. But remember what I said at the beginning of this video. Anzac Day in honour of all Australian and New Zealand military that fought and many did not return. War is hell. All wars, no matter where they're conducted, are hell and should be prevented and banned. And the kinds of men and some women that want to wreak vengeance and create war on other peoples should be put in a tiny little padded cell to duke it out till one of them dies, and thus avoiding dragging millions and millions and millions of innocents and serving personnel into atrocities not of their own making. Mama T has spoken. Bye for now. Have a beautiful day, what's left of it. The time is currently 12:25 p.m, so the rain's starting to come over again, and it's bleak in the city of Brisbane today, but some of us are still fueled by our own innate choosing life and choosing freedom and choosing our own peace, which we preserve daily, and sparking joy in our own little undertakings. So take good care, be of good cheer. Bye for now, people of Earth.